Well, hey everyone, welcome back to another Midweek conversation. My name is Joe Eric, and I am here with Pastor Lisa, and I'm excited for this conversation because we're going to be talking about prayer and fasting. If you're going to be watching this at the time this airs, we are actually going into, as a church corporately, a week-long fast called Week of Faith, and I'm so excited with two E's. Not with the EA.
Not week of faith.
Not week of faith.
If you're week of faith, you need a week of faith.
But we're going to go into a week-long fast called Week of Faith, and it's going to be starting coming up this Monday. But if you're going to be watching this at a later time, just so you know, we do fast all throughout the year.
We do.
As a church, but also we encourage fasting and praying as something you should implement in your everyday life as a Christian. So we have a lot of questions because we put it on social media to see if anyone had any questions about prayer and fasting, and some people did. And so I want to take all the time that we have to just go ahead and talk about what fasting is, prayer, and how do we do it, and pretty much everything people ask. So to start this off, our first question is very broad and just right to the point, but what is fasting, and what is the purpose behind why we do it as a church and as Christians?
Yeah. I was really surprised. The questions were really good. I was expecting something crazy because I remember when I first came to Christ that Pastor and Melissa, our founding pastors, were fasting, and I came in the middle of that, and they said we went out to eat one night, and they ordered not the soup but the broth of the soup, and I was like, maybe they're on a diet or something. I'm trying to figure out and assess the situation,
yes.
right? And so we're getting in there, and I was like, so are y'all like dieting? Or like, what's going on? And they said, no, we're fasting. And legitimately, with zero, church background or very little, I legitimately asked, you mean like a slim fast or like what kind of fast?
Yeah.
And they were like, no, a fast. We're fasting in order to, right, push down the things of our flesh so that our spirit can increase. Yeah. And it just impressed something upon me when they said it's anything that takes your time or your focus away. And we want our focus to be on God during this time. Yeah. And I remember going through my own life and kind of assessing as a brand new Christian, fresh out of the world, very worldly, and just looking at some things. And it was in those moments that I actually dedicated a couple pretty major things in my life to the Lord, and He answered. Wow. I initiated the step, and He answered. So it's pushing our flesh down in order for our spirit to rise.
I know for me, being young, I remember I wanted to fast, and I ended up fasting on a big decision in my life, wondering if I'm going to go to college, if I'm going to do whatever, this route, or is ministry what God's calling me to. I remember taking a week long, and Pastor Melissa gave me a year-long devotional, and encouraged me, go ahead and fast about this. And that's what I did. I took the next week, and I also remember doing a 10-day fast whenever I first started dating Delia, my current wife. I took 10 days, and I just fasted, saying, God, this is a big decision, probably the biggest decision. And this is not even before we got married. This is like to date this girl. I said, God, is this what you want? And so I think it's also discipline as well. It's a discipline. Fasting is this discipline, again, to remind ourselves that our body is not in control.
That's right.
That it is ultimately God, His will, His plan that is in control. And it's ultimately, like you said, to crucify the flesh and to remind our spirit that He's in control, not our body, not our flesh. And back then in the Bible, the Old Testament, New Testament, they fasted food. Most of the fasting they talked about was food. And you'll see that as well as a church. We do the Daniel fast that regards food. And for some people, you're fasting, it has to do with food. Maybe they do liquids or, no carbs or whatever.
Right.
But nowadays, we see a lot of people fasting social media,
for
TV,
sure.
because just as back then, food is a necessity as well as today. For some people, I think TV's a necessity in their own life that they need to say we need to cut that, or social media has become a necessity.
They think it's a necessity.
Yes.
Correct. Yeah.
And it's one of those things that we got to cut and put it to the cross and say, no, I need that time with God. And what would you say is the purpose behind people fasting? I know there's many different purposes, but what are some of those purposes?
You can fast for all kinds of reasons. We want to gain a closer relationship with God.
Yes.
And I just want to clarify too on the media, I don't mean to say that they think they need it as in condemnation, because I think that we're in a day and a time where we have to have community, and a lot of that community is online.
And it's used to
But
reach
I
people.
do think that should be a part of your fasting. I think that media in some way should be incorporated. Like it should be nothing outside of, Christian music, nothing outside of anything that's glorifying to God. But I think that we fast for so many different reasons: freedom, for healing, for deliverance, or just personal ministry in order to, if we're feeling oppressed in some ways, and just to gain insight. Like I think that drawing that away, you know, we come from a place of intimacy with the Lord. We come from a place of a spiritual place, and our flesh is where the enemy is going to attack, but it's so temporary, you know, and so, you know, I think restoring back to that intimacy and restoring back to our spiritual senses, you know, seeing and hearing and tasting and all of this touching, that needs to be restored back, and I think those things are heightened during the time of fasting.
Yes, that's so good. Another question is, how long should someone fast? I know that's, you know, taking the right turn.
Some other people, like 30 minutes.
Right?
I fast every night for 8 hours while I sleep. You know, different times, different things. So we have an appointed 21-day fast at the beginning of the year. This time we're doing an appointed week fast, so I would say you should fast for 1 week. But there's other times, like you say, like you know, maybe you feel led to do something else or different or something different. Some people will do intermittent fasting. I used to do that really frequently in Bible college. It was one meal a day, and that's not like go buck wild on the meal. It's literally just you're fasting. I called it a 23-hour fast, and then you eat a meal. But it was for spiritual purposes. I know. When you get called to a fast, sometimes it's a 40-day fast. You and God are determining what that fast is, but be prayerful about it, because when you commit to it, follow through with it, because it's not like, you know, I'm determining to fast for a week and I get to Wednesday and I'm like, okay, God changed his mind. But don't do that. Don't beat yourself up if you fall. Like, pick it back up, start again. So the important thing is be in communication with God before you fast, you know, and know what you're doing. Set a goal and a realistic expectation, and then push yourself a little bit further than, you know what I mean? Don't go easy on yourself.
It should be challenging.
Right.
As studying for this conversation, you know, everything that was put out there it should be challenging. Sure. It shouldn't be, you know, the very reason why we're killing our flesh, we're not going to give our flesh the gratitude by saying, oh, I'm going to cut it short. It's like, no, we're going to go the distance. This is a time for God. This is a time for me to lean in into him.
Don't give up like asparagus with mushroom sauce if that's not your thing. You're like, oh, I'm sacrificing. Really? I mean, could you? You know, so.
Now, another question, which is actually a really good one, is why do I feel, this is when someone put on social media, why do I feel more opposition when I fast?
Oh, man, it's real estate. That's a real estate question. You're real estate, you know what I mean, for the kingdom of God.
That's good.
And there will always be a fight for that territory. So when you're taking territory, the enemy is under the false thought that it is his. It's belonged to him, maybe areas of your life for so long. He's just set up home there, and he's like, this is mine. So when you start taking that back, of course there's going to be opposition. And it's your flesh. Again, it's your flesh rising up against you. You know, that's where the enemy, that's his battleground. Yes, he can reach us in our mind, and yes, he can reach, you know what I mean? But ultimately, that's untouchable. He only has permission, the permission that we give him to touch those things. But the flesh, my gosh, the soul, the will, you know, all of that is his territory, or he thinks. So
we even see it in when Jesus is tempted in the wilderness for 40 days. He literally is interacting with the enemy, with the devil himself, trying to tempt him. It is right there while he's fasting, he is being tempted. And so why would it be different with us? And I think it's also for us to understand that God is very much aware, and his attention is like we get God's attention when we fast, and it would be dumb of us to think we don't get the enemy's attention as well. Because we are all of a sudden, like out of nowhere, right? We are just breaking our habits, or what we do on a normal day basis with this fast, whatever it is that people are giving up, whatever it is that we're saying, no, I'm putting this aside so I can get more of God. That is getting God's attention, the enemy's attention, because it's breaking what the enemy has. And we even said it in a past conversation that if he can't kill you, he'll distract you. And so now all of a sudden, when we put the distractions that the enemy has been using against us, and we put them away to focus on God, the enemy's like, wait, what interrupted my plan? I need to put something else. You know, like there are practical understandings of like, I think you will face more opposition.
He sees so many different ways. And even that with the temptation with Jesus, Jesus, it started with Adam and Eve. He did the same thing. He came to them with the same temptations. He came to Jesus with the same 3 temptations, and he comes to us with the same 3 temptations. And it's, you know what I mean? It's gosh, and one of this is like, the flesh, the eyes, the flesh, and the pride of life. Same three things that we've got to deal, we've just got to deal with those.
Yeah.
And this is the way we do it. This is the way we overcome, to remind the enemy and to remind our own flesh, you're not in charge. I'm in charge.
Yes.
You know what I mean?
Another question that was put out there is, what if I fast and nothing comes out of it?
That's not a thing.
Yeah, I know. Yeah.
Yeah, but that's a great question. That's a
Yes.
great question for clarity. But it's not a thing. I think that we measure by earthly measurements, and this is a spiritual principle. And we know that God's principle is multiplication, period. So no matter what we're sowing, if we're sowing fasting, it says you reap what you sow. But when we sow it, there's also a multiplication that happens. If you sow a kernel of corn, you reap a full ear of corn, a full stalk of corn, as a matter of fact.
Yes.
That's God's multiplication. If we're sowing prayer and fasting, we're going to reap. And I think that sometimes we get our expectations on one thing, and I think we should be very conscious about praying God's will in situations, and so that we're expecting to see His will, and not to expect to see our own will.
Yeah, because I think we ultimately, yes, people come in to pray for a result. Like when you say prayer requests, praise reports. Like we want a good report, and sometimes we have a will when we pray, and I'm not saying God's going to strike you down with lightning. But when that will does not happen, I think we need to remind ourselves that, like, really, what was this all for? Again, was it for God to answer something I needed, or ultimately for me to get more of God and for me to grow the relationship? And not that, I'm not saying that to say, like, oh, God doesn't care about your prayer requests. No, He does, because He cares about you. But at the end of the day, exactly what you said. Remember, when we say your will be done on earth as in heaven, like, we're saying your will, God, not mine. So when my will isn't answered and God's will is, then we can be comforted and we can find peace in it. And I think that helps us in everything that we do, especially in fasting. And so, because really the goal is to get more of God in this time.
That's right.
Because even as a church, we're praying for miracles in this week of faith. We're praying for miracles and we're believing for miracles. But at the end of the day, is we want to see our church grow closer to God. Yeah. That's the biggest miracle. Yeah. And I don't want to.
That's the priority. That's the priority of prayer. Prayer is that relationship with the Father. Prayer is. That's the number one thing. That's what motivates us to pray, is to have relationship with the Father, and everything else is a byproduct of that.
Yes. And getting close to the end here with our time is, my second to last question is, someone asked, is fasting required? Is this something required? Do we see it in the Bible? But is fasting required?
Yes. No.
Lean into the mic.
Yes. I'm not going to say it's required, but that's kind of it's just a different way it's assumed.
Yes. Expected.
Like, it's expected. Yeah. Jesus didn't require it. He actually expected it, because there's scriptures where He says, we were talking about Matthew 6:16, where it says, when you.
And not if.
Not if. Yes. It says, when you give, when you pray, when you fast. So for me, it's always the difference between when people come to these questions that are very black and white, can I do this or can I do that? What they're trying to, usually it's motivated by a loophole. Like, can I get away with maybe not doing it, or can I get away with doing something that maybe is not completely beneficial? What's a replacement for that? It's like when you're, like when you're dieting and you're looking for something to taste exactly like a Rice Krispie treat or something, you're going to be disappointed every time because you're expecting that, right? What can I replace it with? Well, stop trying to replace it. Like, don't do that. Fasting is fasting, and it's the difference between good and great. It takes your prayer life to this whole different level. And so, is it required? I mean, is that the way we really want to ask that? It's expected. Jesus expects it of His disciples, of His true followers.
I think the best example that I can put in is like in marriage terms, is going out on date nights required? Well, no, like it's not like you didn't. It's not somewhere in a document, right? It's like, oh, if you don't, then all of a sudden, no, it's required, but it's expected. Yeah, your spouse is expecting it. It's that growing intimacy, like in those times together in conversation where you're by yourself and not, lost in your job, and not lost taking care of kids, and not just lost, doing the things that you've always done with school coming back. No, but it's like, no, but we're going to take that time, that day, that night, whatever it may be, the vacation, staycation, those 3 days to just grow in intimacy. No, it's not required to date your spouse, but but it's expected.
Man.
And it's the same thing with God.
Yeah,
It's like you said.
I would apply that. I would make that prayer and fasting a date night.
Yes.
I would call it that. Like,
Yeah.
we're going to go on a time where we regroup and come get together, and I want to hear the intimacy and what we're doing together in the future.
Yes. Because you can say that whole thing of like, well, I'm praying all the time, right? Like, I don't ever stop praying. Yeah, that's good. I'm always with my wife too. We work at the same place, but we still need those times to be like, no, we're not talking about work. I'm with you, and I want to know more about you, and it's what we do in fasting. And to get to our last question, I want to just say for anyone watching there that's maybe was kind of like taking their next step of like, okay, I want to fast, I want to do the week of faith, or maybe watching this at later timers, and they're saying like, hey, things are happening in my life, or I just feel stale in my relationship with God, I want to fast, and they're taking a step. What would you encourage someone about to start fasting for the first time?
Yeah, do it. Yeah. For sure. Be realistic. I think we said it a little bit earlier. Be realistic in what you're doing, and then push yourself even further. The biggest thing for me is always have a plan. Yeah. Like, get with God, see what it is that you're wanting to commit to, make a commitment to Him, and then follow through with the commitment. Yeah. Even if there's stumbling that happens on the way, but just start. If you're starting with a few days, if you're starting with a week for me is a great starter, where you can explore the different types of fasts that you're wanting to do. But again, I will say it over and over and over, push yourself further than that is beyond your own capability. Yeah. Let's say that, in order to allow God in to have His way and show you that you can be sustained on Him. It's not by your strength, but by His. It's not by your power, but by His. Yeah,
I love that. Just remind ourselves that I can be sustained by God, not alone, not with everything else that's happening in my life. Because we look to so many things to sustain us and forget that God is the ultimate one that can sustain us.
He's all sufficient.
Yes. That's so good. So for everyone watching this now, when it's going to be aired out or at a later time, and we just encourage you to implement fasting into your life. It will completely transform you. And if you're watching this when this airs, we're starting our week of faith coming up Monday. You'll hear about it in the message this coming up Sunday. But man, we just look forward to all that God is going to do and the miracles He's going to perform and show up in your life. We love you guys, and we'll see y'all back here next week.